there's a lot more that you impact than just your little corner of the world, and things that you say and actions that you take do have a consequence.
And that's the problem. You have shared characters. When they're your characters, they will always come across the way that you want them to. When you share a character, you are unfortunately passing the torch.
Really, any fan fiction is at its heart. People who love the characters love a story up to that point where someone has made a decision that they simply don't agree with.
As a creator and a director and as a writer, you go like, this is the part that speaks to me, but at the end, it still recalibrates back.
I'm just gonna start us off. Welcome to episode 2 of season 3 for Writing Prose. We have our amazing panel, of course, with Eric Canete, Cyborg Valkyrie, Mr. Mike Gibson, or Gibby, because that's way better. And, of course, Shae is here. And we have 2 phenomenal guests. So we have the incredibly talented Mr. Jason Crager. How are you, sir?
I'm well. How is everyone here?
Doing good.
Thank you for being here, man.
Of course, we have the man of way too many damn hats, Mr. Adam Lawson. How are you?
I am well. To be in this company is a good Sunday morning. For
2
sure.
gentlemen of inestimable talent.
Right?
Sai, you are far too kind. Though I do like Shae, you know, the hair down look, comb over, you know, from like ponytail to you know, cosplay. It's good, you know. I like this.
Yeah, I'm a person actually. I'm not always blue with gills and
I know, this is amazing. And Sai, we went from robot to face. I mean, there's been changes.
I love seeing
here.
Sai's face. I wish Sai would go live every once in a while.
I was last week. I
missed that.
No,
Are you
Sai
kidding?
only goes live for tips. And for tips, you gotta.
Will you jump on the table and dance for me if I'm throwing tips at people?
Well, I mean, you have to do better than $50 because $50 got Shae to dance on Friday in some of our new merch, the official Red Valkyrie bikini.
Yes. Wow. Well, I've got $65.
This is where this got
I've got $65 right here.
Yeah.
Let's rapidly change the topic from that and go into
My God,
writing.
Yes. You know.
Gibbs like, I'm ready
Gibby's-
to do this.
Sorry.
75.
My fault.
Are nipples allowed on stream? I don't know.
So what we were going to talk about, because there's such a variety of experience here, you know, like I'm very much on the younger, as far as experience goes, end of this panel, because I've got my 1 published work in Adam's Kill Journal, yay! and it's 8
amazing.
pages. Oh, thank you. But that's kind of, it's that, and then, you know, I got published in high school. Like, I don't really have anything else. But you guys have a lot of experience across a whole bunch of different mediums.
Well, we may have to bring you in on something new then, Shae. We just have to bring you in.
That's right.
Your people call my people, which is you calling me, actually.
I thought they called Sai. I thought Sai was your people.
Oh, if you call Sai, then I'm never getting a job.
Fuck that. I will hire you up for every single thing. Paint your house? Okay, Shae's in.
Paint your house in a Red Valkyrie bikini. Is there a $75 tip?
Let's create a Shae on Fiverr.
I've got 85 for that. I've got 85
Yes.
for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's start this out
This bus keeps careening off of the freaking road.
We're the hardest working channel on YouTube.
I just want to point out how badly we broke Crager. It did not take a lot. Okay, so...
Does it? I'm the sucker for redheads and bikinis, apparently.
He's looking back at his wall like, I could use a fresh coat on that.
Where have we gone?
The problem is you get me,
writing.
so...
Yes, let's talk about writing.
As long as you show up in a bikini.
I work out.
Okay. Nice.
Gibby, I
Gibby
bet
would just
you
like to
do.
volunteer the fact that he works out. It's independent
Yes,
of anything that we're talking about.
Yeah, he works
I'm
out.
getting older in my life, and it's getting like twice the work for like a third of the results. So,
Yeah, I'm so not picky, so it should be fine.
all right. California's a hell of a hike, though. All right, let's go with this. You had
Gib in a
topic, Shae.
bikini painting Crager's house.
For that, I have 100. For that,
How
I have
long does it take to get to
For
100?
that, I have 100.
yes, I
All right, so let's start with Crager. What's kind of your experience in storytelling and how it's been different through the various mediums that you've had to try and work through?
So I noticed a difference, obviously, in writing like prose novels compared to writing comic books. So there's a difference, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But my experience is limited. As far as like writing comics, I had written a few short stories when I was at Avatar and drew a couple things, and then of course I've come up with a few movie things that were supposed to be written by a real like movie scriptwriter. What came out of that was actually ridiculously good compared to what I gave him, because he was able to take my concepts and turn them into wonderful like dialogues, essentially. But for me, the main difference is usually first, second, and third person, like what you're deciding to write in. And then when I start thinking about novels, I start thinking about like the easiest way to say something to somebody, almost as opposed to like me writing something. I'm more of a storyteller type of thing. I'm trying to think in the terms of like how fucking Stephen King thinks.
Right.
That guy has a way of just writing dialogue that is ridiculously simple and just dead on. And cocaine did that? Yeah, maybe. I don't know if that's the case. I did a lot of coke and I didn't become a better writer.
Did you think you were better at the time, though?
No. I never actually.
Opium. I hear a lot of good authors love the opium.
I was an ex-heroin addict. You know, the thing that actually made me write better was alcohol, and thank you, Hemingway, for that. I think that, you know, just that changing of just drinking a little bit actually helped me loosen up enough to be able to write stuff. But that being said, I am not really a writer. I'm more of a visual storyteller that just so happens to be able to write.
But see, that I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. Like I'm an editor for Absolute, and anytime I talk to Jason Bascom about he's like, I'm not a writer. I just draw things and then loosely create dialogue for them to intertwine.
Right.
But after I got halfway through editing Absolute Book 2, where I'm looking at, you know, panels and beats and all of that kind of stuff. And we got to a point where I was trying to get Cy to, you know, come in on the editing with me. And I finally hit a point where I was like, Cy, you're no longer allowed to know anything that happens. And they were like, why? I was like, you don't understand the impact, because I know book 1 and I've already read it, obviously. Right. And then here I am with book 2 and the things that he's setting up. I was like, you are not allowed to have the foreknowledge before you've read this series because it was so well done.
Oh,
he
wow.
hit beats so wonderfully, and like despite the fact that his style isn't typically like, his women are super angular, everything is like bulging eyes, and it's really stylized. It's not necessarily like the pretty art to look at. It's the interesting art to look at. He made me care so much about these characters, and he had such tender moments with some of them. In a couple of the panels that I was like, that can't get ruined. Like, you have to be able to see it. And Jason will still, to this day, like, I'm an artist. I'm not a writer. I don't write,
right.
but he wrote Absolute book too. Like, he wrote both of those, and
right.
he gave a very well crafted story. So I think that a lot of people don't realize, just because you don't sit at a typewriter with, 2 packs of cigarettes down and a bottle of scotch next to you, exactly, it doesn't mean you're not a writer. Just because you're not sitting there for 10 hours a day typing away, with severe alcoholism and whatever, like,
well,
that's not what a writer is.
The thing about it is I think that maybe in some ways that, like, the seeking vice to write is creates sort of the self-destructive, Fitzgerald existence, right? Which makes you your own drama in your own story, if you will, right?
Right.
In the same way that Fitzgerald ruined his life, he ruined kind of everything he touched. And so, like, that was the price of that, because he didn't have a conscious, protective, thoughtful way of getting into his zone. He did it by wrecking the world around him. Yeah. Sure. And in fact, I've worked with actresses whose names I will not name, who said, "Hey, Adam, listen, I just need to be a diva and make hell for everyone because I need it to get into the zone." Right?
Into that character, yeah.
So they've developed, unfortunately, a destructive habit to get there. And I think that that's the misnomer, and we kind of romanticize these things.
Yes.
But they're a false romanticism, right? Because they ultimately, like, they're great for romance, lousy for your real life. And so I think that, you know what I mean? Like, an alcohol addiction isn't really good for people's life in general, right? But it's like finding, I guess what I'm trying to say with it is, I feel like in the pursuit of, like, saying, "Hey, I'm the writer," it doesn't mean you'd have to find a self-destructive way into yourself, right?
Absolutely
and that there are more meaningful ways, to find a way to free your headspace. I think Eric Canete is a champion of this as an artist. The way you're so disciplined, right? And I think the way Otomo was so disciplined, they've kind of functioned the opposite way, and, like, found their, like, freedom in their discipline. And so maybe there's 2 ways in. So as far as, like, you can be a writer without being, cigarette, beer, and typewriter,
Yeah. So Eric, I feel like that's a perfect segue for you to weigh in on kind of what it's been like for you, because you've got a pretty varied experience between, you're doing your own comic writing, you've done stuff for movies, you've done stuff for Disney, you've done stuff for animation, you've done stuff for all over.
Yeah. Let's see. One of the bigger takeaways that I had in any of the things that I've done is each of those instances in whatever medium, it's about it's different sets of it's a different set of tools for problem solving, right? Because there's a way that you can problem solve for something like an animated television show, and oftentimes it's stood up foundationally by the writing, but ultimately the execution is visual, right? But when it comes to something like prose, everything has to stand up in the words, right?
Yep.
But the umbrella of that is the communication of, like, character and motivation. So, like, or at the bottom of it, I get, depending, right? Like, it all comes down to, like, what is the best way that I can tell this compelling story about these characters? Because rarely have I ever been put in front of something where, like, tell a story about this building. And I'm like, there's no way I can tell a story about that building successfully. It's almost like, if it is about an inanimate object, which I've had one of the most challenging things I've ever had to do is, like, we're going to be talking about this artifact, and I'm like, I can't talk about that artifact through the lens of these people's experiences with it. I'm like, oh yeah, I get that. But that's still
people?
very
okay, good.
Yeah, there's this human emotion and reaction to it. So sometimes, and that's pretty universal, whether it be in, you know, a more of a gags type of comedy show to an action adventure show. It's about that person's reaction to that thing or situation. So as long as I keep my mind on that, the only thing that really changes is the execution.
And wouldn't you say, Eric, sometimes too,
execution.
I think, you know, when I'm writing a script or when I'm writing a comic book or, you know, I'm writing a pitch deck to a studio or whatever is the case, that I wonder if, like, when you're mentioning focusing on the reaction, right, of the people, that, like, sure. What I think at the core I try to hold on to as hard as I can is, what does our character want? Yeah. What gets in the way of that, and how do they solve it? I think that sometimes we think that backstory defines people, and it doesn't. Sure. We think that their hairstyle or their clothing define characters in a meaningful way, but they don't really. What defines them the most is how they achieve their objective. Sure. There's this great moment in The Dark Knight where, you know, remember the Joker puts the pencil on the table and says, "I'm going to do a magic trick."
Oh, yes.
And the guy comes over to get him, and he slams his head down on the pencil, and it punches through his eye and kills him right there, right?
Yeah.
In that moment, the Joker was defined. The makeup and the hair and the costuming helped accentuate, you know, the actor's performance, but he was trying to get control of this group, and that choice he made and the words he chose to, like, how he had scared them.
Yes.
Was what defined the Joker. And I feel like, you know, sort of this, you know, weaving these lines of what is, like you're saying, what is this character and their reaction? Eric, I love that, because it's like, what is this character? How are they trying to get it? And what are the things that stop them? And then what do they resort to get there? And
well,
in
and
that...
oh,
go ahead, say it, yeah.
I think what you're kind of getting at, this is one of the reasons why, and since you mentioned the Joker, I have to go to my girl Harley, if you couldn't tell by the background. One of the things that I hate the most is when people handle Harley like she's dumb, or like she's kind of flippant, like she's totally batshit crazy. And it's like, no, you don't understand. If you know Harley, if you know Harleen Quinzel, she was this absolutely amazing psychiatrist, top of her class, youngest to ever progress. And in her initial motivation, the reason that she is so tethered to the Joker no matter what is because she had it very naively in her mind that she could save him, that she was smart enough and she could get through to, no matter how crazy he was, she could get through to the Joker and she could save him. Now, there's nothing to save because he's not crazy because he's crazy. He's crazy because he's calculated. This is what he's chosen. All of the moves that he takes that seem like they're very chaotic are all very carefully plotted. He knows what he's doing. And the chaos is what helps him maintain that control. And these are all parts of the character that if you don't know and you don't understand these characters and you don't live with them, that's what the new artists and the new writers who take on these characters, that's how they end up ruining them, is because they don't understand these fine details, because it's not spelled out in every freaking
They buy into the shtick.
Issue. Exactly. And it's like the shtick is just the byproduct of what's actually going on in these characters' minds in order for them to attain what they're trying to attain. And I think that a lot of people get caught in boiling stuff down to such a basic root that they
that's human nature, though, to take something and boil it down to define it, limit, put it in a box and set it on a shelf. So that's how their mind understands the type of thing.
Sure.
And a character like Harley, like you brought up a very good point. You know, it's like you, and with respect, you project your love onto this character, and then you will extract meaning from that love and that character. To another person who's writing Harley or defining, like, they might not see the same things you are and portray her as a bimbo or an airhead or something like that, because Harley doesn't mean as much to them as, say, the Joker does or Poison Ivy does. You know, it always comes down to the hand that controls the pen. and how the other person's being portrayed. You know, I wrote a piece a long time ago about how the Joker is a lot like Miss Piggy, meaning like they constantly beat around their respective other, and it's and then that was eventually brought up years later, and it's so when you take something like Harley, she can be all those things at once depending on who's controlling the pen, and that's the problem when you have shared characters. When they're your characters, they will always come across the way that you want them to. And a reader or viewer may or may not extract that meaning. But when you share a character, you are unfortunately passing the torch. I mean, comic books are a perfect example of such a thing. You know, that's if it's a shared space, someone might take your character and make them in a completely different way.
Sure.
Well, so that's an interesting point that you're bringing up, because you've got your characters in your novel series, and like obviously I'm going to talk about Aggie because she's my absolute favorite.
Sure.
But I'm really interested to kind of hear, because I feel like Aggie, from the people that I know who have read it, feel pretty closely to the same way that I do about her, at least as far as she's portrayed. So do you think that when you're writing prose, when you're writing, you know, an actual novel, that maybe you can sculpt it a little bit easier and have a little bit more control over it?
I mean, without a doubt. Like, so I believe it was Mr. Lawson who brought up earlier, or Adam, if you're feeling frisky. He broued up earlier first, second, or third person. No, it was Jason. Someone said first, second, or third person. Okay, it was Jason. Mr. Crager. Yeah. He said you have to choose your venue, and that's a very good start when you're doing a novel. I, first person, or he, she, they, we, third person. You know, the only time you do second person is if you choose your own adventure story. But if you were taking an I type of character, a lot of pulp detectives, you know, the Harry Dresdens of this world, things like that, they're all from first person perspective. And I've written some books like that, and it's a lot easier. It is the easiest way to write because you are the vehicle for which all the world is perceived. If you're writing in third person, which Aggie was my first experiments writing in third person, so you have to is it limited POV? Is every chapter from a single person's POV? Is it omnipotent? And I hate that. I don't like that style at all because I don't like being in everybody's head at once. I like a person whose chapter, while it's still Aggie sees this, but it's her emotions, her reflections, her reactions. Yeah. But then when you switch to the villain, they might see the exact same thing from a different perspective, and that's where you get duality. That's where you get the thing. And so shaping a character comes down to getting into that mindset, and how would they, not necessarily me, but how would they see this, do this, react to this, you know? It's a challenge because then you go back and you look at it again. I mean, I've had readers or beta readers that say, I like this, but I don't feel like this person has their own distinct voice. And then you're like, okay, so maybe this secondary or tertiary character needs to have a voice. And it's harder than it looks. Because at the end of the day, sometimes you're just like, I just don't have time and I don't give a shit. I'm going to move on to the next project. So you know what? Tertiary character number 7, you unfortunately you just sound like everybody else. You're
very flat and have almost no personality, and it's not really gonna make a difference in the end.
And the thing is, she started as a tertiary character in my Technomancer books,
right?
As the Chimera character, and I liked her so much that I wanted to tell her origin story, and that's where I just said, let's rewind time and tell her story, how she went from point A to point Z, and let's show that. And it sucks because you know that the character ends up in another series, so death is not on the table. But what happens in the story, can I still make it compelling? And that was my challenge to myself. Can you take a character that you know exists later and show progression and love and heartbreak and hate and damage and success, you know?
Can you remove the ultimate stakes, but still have there be that tension that...
And it's not about beating your character down, but I love a tragic hero, so...
Well, and I think that everybody does, because we all know what it's like to go through pain and anguish and heartache, and we all want to believe that no matter how bad that gets, that we can always still come out on top. So that's why we, as human nature, we constantly are rooting for the underdog, and we want to see people, you know, really go through the shit and then still come out on top, because you're like, well, I'm not going through, I didn't have my mom and dad brutally murdered in front of me in an alleyway and then had to get raised by my butler.
Butler dad.
Mostly okay.
Butler dad.
But dad.
In fact, that's my next my next comic is called Butler Dad.
Butler Dad.
It's gonna be big. I think an interesting you mentioned about you're saying the shared universe experience versus your own story. right? And I think, one of my favorite books of all time, I think maybe my favorite writer artist of all time is Kentaro, who did Berserk, right? Mm-hmm. And when you look at Berserk, you're looking at, Eric, how many, I guess, is there maybe 7,000 pages of Berserk that have been done?
Close to that, sure. Yeah.
And it's just, it was him. He wrote and drew all 6,000 pages. And there is an authenticity to what that experience is. So speaking about different mediums, right? There's even within the medium of graphic novels, there's this where it's yours, right? There's Kentaro writing Guts. There's Eric writing and drawing Arc. And then there is somebody jumping in on Harley, right? Who's never met the creator, doesn't know the creator, probably hasn't read all 700 issues, but has a take, but has a take, if you will. And so I think and I think as a fan, you have to kind of know what you're experiencing, and also too what you're built when you're comes to writing, like, what am I crafting, and at least for me, I think there is a desire for authenticity wherever you're doing it, right? If it's your own character or if you're in a shared universe, and your desire to stay committed to that, I feel like is the profound thing. Like the Watchmen TV series, for example, on HBO, I didn't actually care for it, because it was an abandonment of the message of Watchmen, the graphic novel. There's one thing, if you took those, you abandoned this because what's lovely about Watchmen, right, is the graphic novel is it's a story about essentially a broken world that gets healed by an alien invasion, right? If this alien shows up and it unites people, and they cut it out of the film, or bizarrely, like, I don't know why you cut that out of the film, and then when HBO Max did it, they turned it into a race war instead of actually a story about actually the uniting of people through an alien invasion at the end. Like that's the payoff of that story. And so and I guess I felt like well made, well directed, well acted. It just isn't Alan Moore's work, and you should have just made your own.
But to be fair, I don't know if that was the exercise, right? I think it goes back to the earlier part of what you said, which is there was a clear baseline established in as far as what the graphic novel represented, and I think because of the cachet of that, I think that's what was more important, right? Which is the Watchmen trademark copyright, right? They say, what else can we do with this, right? So from Warner Brothers' perspective, I don't think that you're wrong in saying like it abandoned it, but only if that was ultimately the mission, if that was the bullet point to say, hey, stay on this path. I think one of the key things is somehow maintaining the spirit of the original material and carrying it on. And in some ways, it did it pretty well, right? Not perfectly, because clearly they had to make more new things within the context of that universe. I just thought that by way of spirit, it was like the lightest version of the patina, because the one that I refer to all the time to be like, oh, here is the baseline. The baseline understanding is the girl with the dragon tattoo. The baseline understanding of what that narrative was given to two very specific directors and their interpretation of it. And I thought in either of those cases, it was executed pretty dang well, keeping in mind the cultural nuance of where they were making their films, right? So it's different from that side of the world to our side of the world. So the way Fincher did it versus where did they shoot the original theatrical?
That one was awesome. The one with Numi Rapace.
The one with Numi that was shot in Sweden. Yeah, that was shot in Sweden.
Yeah, it's gorgeous, but you understood like, oh, they're hitting this part of the narrative pretty hard because culturally this is a big deal to this region of the world, right? They did not hit it as hard. Instead, pivoting towards another portion of it in the Fincher adaptation, right? So I think that's when it's the most successful, is like understanding the spirit, but then also because as an author, because as a creator and a director and as a writer, you go like, this is the part that speaks to me, but at the end it still recalibrates back to the source material. And I think that's where the Watchmen TV series misses that opportunity, is that recalibration. Sure, this thing is our take on it, but it doesn't necessarily shift back to the light. And when I say cosmetically, I think like, oh, look at all of these superheroes that are the messed up versions of what they potentially could be, right? And how they contrast to, oh gosh, at this point, it's, you know, this TV series is so far away from my mind. There was just so many like little tiny thumbtack things that they put in there to be like, that's a callback, right? And I'm like, it is. It's enough of a callback, but ultimately this thing could exist without this masthead, without this title, and it'll still be whatever it is, and pretty dang successful at it. I don't know sometimes why they choose to use the title, except to say, oh, that's the cachet. You're bringing that over because you own it. You know,
so that's the clickbait. That's the clickbait, so to speak. Yeah.
This is an interesting kind of segue because Cyborg has had a lot of impressions and stuff on things that they've written that was fanfic, where, you know, you have those moments where it feels to the vast majority of the fans who have read something or watched something or consumed it in whatever way that a mark was missed or something was just grossly overlooked, mishandled in a way that didn't make sense to what they had previously set up, which usually happens when either budget constraints come in, timing, changing of writers, whatever. And so, or, you know, Cy, do you want to talk a bit about...
Yeah, or just cowardice on behalf of the creative team or the studio who's making the thing. They don't have the balls to do what they've led up to. And I
think Cy, you think though, I think having been in so many of these rooms and sold TV shows and made them, it isn't even about courage per se. It's that one is usually the executives on the other side of the table aren't a fan.
Very,
they have
very
a
much
job,
not.
Right?
Very much not.
And it's arbitrarily they're making Watchmen. Is it because they, when they were 15 years old, they read that book and went, "This changed my life"? No, they're fulfilling a job, and so they're leaving a mark on it, and they get a list of directions from their president of the network. He says,
it's like in the military.
It needs to have this. It needs to have this. Yeah, right?
Anytime someone new comes into power, you have to leave your mark. You have to leave your name on it. And so then you can turn around and say, this is what I did when I was in that position. And that's how I justify the paycheck.
Well, we can certainly go over executives making horrible decisions like Firefly. But, I mean, even... if you want to see how they can just stick their rotten paw into the mix and ruin everything, just look at the difference between Dark Angel Season 1 and Dark Angel Season 2. When Fox executives pressured James Cameron and Egley to completely change the tone of the series. And it went downhill extraordinarily quickly. But what I'm talking about are things like something recent. Okay, Supergirl. Okay. They built this chemistry between Supergirl, Kara Danvers in the series, and Lena Luthor, right? The entire fandom saw it. They saw the tension building between them. They saw the relationship that they had built over the course of years in the show because they were best friends. And the progression of this never actually happened on screen, although they toyed with it. They shot some scenes around it, but they never had the courage to pull the trigger to actually put them in a romantic relationship. And that, I think, is what drives kind of the fan frenzy behind the scenes. Really, any fan fiction is at its heart people who love the characters, love a story up to a point, up to that point where someone has made a decision that they simply don't agree with, or that they just can't countenance because they've taken such ownership of those characters. So writing fan fiction is kind of unique because, I mean, when you do it, and you do it on the most popular site to do it on, every chapter you post, you get feedback on. Every chapter you post, you see how many people look at it. You see who leaves kudos, you see who leaves comments, you see all of those things. And so it's kind of unique in that sense that you don't make the entire meal and then put it out there and wait and see if someone vomits or not. You're giving them like one little side piece at a time.
Yeah.
Interesting, but I like that though, Cy. I think that is what makes fan fiction a fun experience, because ultimately no creator can make everyone happy, right? Whether they didn't have these two characters in Supergirl. Unfortunately, I don't follow the series enough to know the journey of it, but like you had a hope that there was a payoff in a romantic relationship, and that's the cool part about fan fiction is you get to have a reaction to the opposite choice of what the studio did or whatever somebody did, and I think that's the cool part about fan fiction is it's the fantasies that didn't get to play out because you have to make a choice and stick with that whatever the studio did. But what's cool is let's explore Cy's take as if they were in charge.
Right,
That's
or
cool.
making Ray a likable, believable, interesting character, you know.
But Eric, how do you say? Because I'm curious about Eric. You know, because when I approach a comic book as a writer, and Jason over here thought that too. You know, versus you approaching it as an artist, right? Like when I see it first, like with this book I'm working on with Jason called Jawbone Death, I see this guy and he has this jawbone that he's pulled from the monster Leviathan and he's smashing things, and I see the Frank Frazetta Death Dealer and I'm like, okay, this character I want to play with. And how can I build up a story around him, or how do you like when you sit down to write arc? What is it that drives you?
It's the same exact way.
Oh, okay.
It's not any different. Like I guess in the younger, much younger version of myself, everything was visually motivated because I thought like, look how freaking cool that picture is. I want to draw that so bad, you know, or I want to do a version of that so badly, and it really. You know, that's where the interest for me fades away because as soon as I draw it, I didn't really have anything behind it. It was just like the exercise of drawing. And so while that was fun and the picture may have been something that I was super proud of and happy with, it didn't really lead to better storytelling, right? So these days, I often approach things similarly to the way you see it, which is here's my antagonist. My brain works, and this is probably due to my history with it. My brain works in like 3-act structures all the time, right? Here's my main character. Here's my protagonist. This is the thing that they want. Somewhere in here, they're going to be so happy about it, they start singing about it. And then I'm going to put everything in front of them to keep them from getting it. And then near the end, they'll get a version of it or realize that there's something, as far as character arc is concerned, something transformative has happened where they view that thing as less important. It was actually about this thing. It borderlines on so much formula for me now that anytime somebody breaks it and does it poorly, I go, why did you do that? You know, I often run into the buzzsaw of like, that is the most unfulfilling. Again, this is completely subjective, right? But when I see it and I go like, why did you opt for that? You know, because I don't know what you set up your character in Act 1 to want these things, and gave them the most underperforming version of the thing that they want. And it's not to say every ending has to be a happy one, but it just has to make sense. And that's where sometimes, and that's a fault, by the way, that's where I get myself in trouble, where I go like, I can't get over that thing because it feels so unfulfilling. So to your question, similar, it rarely starts off visual. Naturally, I'm taking snapshots in my head of what that shot may be before I draw them. But rare do I go like, ooh, I have a visual, and now I have to come up with a narrative around it.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So I will sometimes.
What about you, Jason?
I come up with sometimes like character ideas where I'm just thinking about like what I want the character to be, and then I design that character around it. Sometimes I'll over design the character specifically to make it more interesting than what it might be. That's part of that. So my ideas, sometimes I'll come up with like whole story arcs and things in my head before I've even thought about visually putting anything to it. And then sometimes I could just see a character or be told about a character and come up with an idea. Like when Adam created the Kill Journal, when the first thing he did was approach me, the first thing I did was come up with a concept that I wanted to work on with him in reference to the Kill Journal without even knowing anything about the Kill Journal. Zero about the Kill Journal. So I came to him and I said, dude, wouldn't this be cool? Boom. He said, yeah, it'd be cool, but I want you to do that. But somehow I was able to come up with something that fit into his narrative, even not knowing any of that stuff. So the visual storytelling from what I had just seen from the other artists literally led me in that direction. So I find that like some of the earliest concepts I ever came up with are like love stories, things like that, usually based around like people who shouldn't love each other, like a demon and a ghost. Like, should they love each other?
Right.
Can this ghost talk this demon into breaking the world? Yeah, I think he could. So I might come up with something like that, and then I'll find something that's visually exciting to go with it. You know, writing sometimes becomes a necessity in some cases. Like, people write things to, like, work thoughts out. People write things to determine different conclusions to things. Like it just depends on what you're
catharsis
doing.
A lot.
Or catharsis, you know, there's lots of stuff like that. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I wrote that went unpublished, like I have a prose novel called Perched that I worked on for, I don't know, about a year. And it's about drug addiction. And it's very much in the vein of Fight Club. But it was written as a cathartic thing. Like, it took life experience with fantasy, and I resolved certain problems I had in my life with the writing of this book. And it was just kind of weird. So I never published it. I actually thought about doing like a live stream and reading it live so that people would get
I think it'd be interesting.
what I was
I borrow a lot of that same type of mentality with all my novels, because whenever I have a character, like, part of me is always going to be like a 9-year-old doodling his favorite action hero, because they're going to have all the cool stuff. You know, I have a lot of old artwork. I'll look back, like, I remember I wrote a backstory for some doodle, I'm like, so I know that, and I'll pluck that into a character. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes when I actually put pen to paper, I'm like, wow, that person doesn't work because they're too cool, or they're too badass, or they're too whatever, and they don't reflect well against the story background. So I start stripping away those pieces, and it's the same thing I talked about last week. These folks, I have a personal thing called the rock without his muscles, meaning if you took everything that makes them great away, are they still a person? Or a Green Lantern without the ring, if we're just being more contemporary.
Right.
And then I start putting in, like, you know, whenever I have writer's kryptonite, I always put like a piece of myself in it. So when you mentioned the Aggie character before, you know, she doesn't feel comfortable with her body. She'll act certain ways, but deep down, you know, she's not comfortable with herself. Well, that's me. I was a chubby kid. I used to make myself vomit. I used to go through those type of body dysmorphia things. It's not a guy or girl or whatever gender type of thing. It's a people thing. And as long as you put something true to that, you know, or with my depression as a kid, you know, and like the dark thoughts I used to have, I put that in my Salem character. So, you know, when he puts a gun in his mouth in the one scene, it's because, you know, I've been there. And that speaks to readers. It speaks to, whether that's visual, whether that's book, whether that's comic, you know, you put something true in it, people react to it. And they start to, like, I remember this. This becomes one of my favorite pieces of medium, because there's something true to it. Now, sometimes it can be just dumb fun. Don't get me wrong. I love dumb fun. But I love, like, back in the day, like MASH or Scrubs. Something goes comedy, dark.
Right.
Why? Because that's real life.
Right.
And speaking of a whole bunch of creative type of here, I'm curious what you all think, because I have a very visual mind. I have to see it in order to write it. I will doodle stuff. I will choreograph a fight scene on a piece of paper, like move from this point to this point, swing around. Because if I can't see it, it doesn't feel real. And I've read some pieces of work that, like, this person loves the sound of their own words, but they don't see the picture. They're just talking about the crackly gray paper. Like, I don't care about the crackly gray paper.
They just wanted a chance to use certain
right,
vocab.
If I see the word cacophony, din, or miasma in the first 2 pages of anything, I stop reading immediately, because a person likes the sound of their words.
Hold on.
It's that's a me thing, because a person loves the sound of their words. They're not actually writing a story at that point. And when I dive into a story, I want to feel something, you know, good, bad, jokes, whatever.
I think it's funny that that's kind of how you put it, because so when I got to write the Kill Journal for Adam, like the little backstory for Marty, literally this is what he gives me. I want you to write a story. It'd be really cool if we found a way to do something kind of with Bloody Mary, and I want you to write it on the character that you think looks the most badass in the story, which is Marty. And I was like, I know nothing else, and I am so down. No. And I just...
And you have 8 pages.
Oh, and you have 8 pages. No, and you have less than 8 pages, and I busted that and was like, Adam, we can't cut it down anymore. Don't pay me anymore for it, but it has to have this extra page or it doesn't make sense.
I thought you made it 9.
Like, I think I don't remember. It was either...
You added an additional
page, added
one
page to
it. It was worth it. Yeah, absolutely.
But it worked with the...
But it's totally worth it, but I like, though, what you did, though, is that you injected so much of you into that. I'll let you go, yeah.
Well, and so that's what I was kind of getting at, is, like, how Gibbs talking about there has to be, like, that emotion behind it. And so when I was looking at this, and I was like, okay, let's, like... I didn't have, here's everything that's happened in Marty's life that's led to where she is. It basically was, here's Marty. She's very close with her dad. Her dad blows shit up. And through her actions, he's going to die. And it was like, shit. Okay. And so the first thing I wrote, and I gave it to Adam, and he was like, okay, so I see where you're going with it. And he's like, I like the vibe, but it doesn't really make sense with what's already in the story. So I get a couple more pieces of this is what the Kill Journal has. And I was like, scrap it. I'm totally redoing it. But the way that this went is I gave like I want to say like 5-sentence blurb to Adam and was like, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And he was like, cool, write it. And I was like, oh, like actually write it. And I was like, okay. So then I gave a little bit more, and he was like, okay, but I kind of need you to like hit the beats. And I was like, oh, okay. So like a 10-page document later that Adam gets, it was like 10 or 15, it was something insane, but it was like,
it was longer than the script. Yeah.
It was way longer than the script. And it was like,
well, you had photo reference.
I was like, here's this panel. The guy should look kind of like this guy right here. I like this chin, but I like those eyebrows.
She
She
storyboarded the whole thing in photos.
Yes.
To build this out. But I loved that because she had a very precise vision of it. And then even in the end, I was making an adjustment to some of the writing that her and I went back and forth on, you know, when they were in the fun house.
Yeah.
And you built a really compelling arc. But I think at the end, when you chose to have her shave her head, and the things you had happen there, I think, were reflective of. I think that was the Shae in that.
It's like the kind of blossoming. It's like, you know, when you feel like you've lived your life in this one little cocoon, and you've maybe been selfish, and you've maybe been in, you know, just all about you, and then you realize like there's a lot more that you impact than just your little corner of the world, and things that you say and actions that you take do have a consequence. And her, you know, going through the transformation that she did to become how she looks in the book, where she's got, you know, bleach blonde hair shaved into a mohawk and everything, that was kind of like her, you know, putting on her gloves to go and face the world that she's now created for herself. And it's something that whenever I write, everything that I write, I've experienced in some way. It's either something directly related to what I've been going through, to feelings that I've had with other people, or like for a lot of my horror anthology, it's been nightmares that woke me up at 2 a.m. gasping for breath and trying to like wrap my mind around what I just experienced and felt. And then when I can regain a little bit of myself, I'm like, that would be a really intense story. And then I start typing it out, like, what were the beats that really got me? What were the parts that really freaked me out? And so I make this very disturbing outline of what I just went through. And I'm like, okay, so now I've got to write it, and now I've got to find someone who can do the fucked up vision in my mind justice for art, because if any of this is off, people aren't going to feel it the same way I did. And that's what my goal is, no matter what the feeling is that I'm trying to convey, that's what I want people who read my stuff to walk away with. And one of the things that I loved about doing the Kill Journal, I didn't get a ton of feedback, but the feedback that I got was, that was really heartbreaking, and I wish it was longer. And I'm like, it's okay that you wish it was longer, because you wish it was longer because you want to know her end goal. you want to know where she ends up. And guess what? We don't know that yet. You're just going to have to keep buying the books. Like, that's how you're going to know where she ends up. But I made it compelling enough that now people are like, I really like Marty and I want to see what happens. And I'm like, good, that was the whole fucking point. Like, keep buying the book series.
To go back to what Gib was saying earlier, though, I don't have an issue with like the overly complicated words as long as it makes sense for character. Right?
I didn't mean to touch a nerve, and I apologize if I did. So
yeah, I think it's when, what do you call it? I think it's when the author makes everybody talk the same.
Sure.
And, I mean, obviously the world is established in such a way. Like, I remember when Kevin Smith dialogue was so the thing that people really attach themselves to, right?
Right.
Like, that's probably not the way people talk. Like, he got that feedback a ton. Like, oh, that's not how people talk. And
or
blah, blah, blah.
Tarantino.
Like, in Kevin, yeah, or like in Aaron Sorkin's world, right? It's all across, like, they talk the way Aaron Sorkin talks, right? Or at least how he sees characters talking. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's when it becomes everyone. Because the moment somebody breaks that talking pattern, suddenly they feel like they're underwritten, when technically they're not, right? Technically they're designed specifically to be that person to contrast that dialogue pattern, that talking pattern, that sort of like dictionary use of words, you know? And I think for me that gets, back in the day, I loved that. I loved West Wing. I loved Aaron Sorkin shows. Sure. But at some point I was like, oh, everyone's just talking the way Sorkin writes them to be. And there's validity to that, because clearly as an author, as a director, as a creator of the show, that's how he leaves his mark. But for me, I feel like there's an opportunity. I think one of those strongest episodes of West Wing is when they're not doing that, but still maintain character. And I know he can do it because he wrote the first 3 seasons on his own or whatever it was. But like, he can do it. He just chooses to in certain segments of the episodes where it goes that fast. It's very Aaron Sorkin. And there's a difference between what those guys do versus the guys who are trying to execute that because they don't understand the nuance of it. So they write everybody the same, thinking, oh, this is a style. Yes, it's a style for these specific creators, right? But you don't know what you're doing with those tools, so you do it poorly. Does that make sense?
100%. When I picked those first 3 words, I just rattled off. And it's only because like because I'm a giant dork and I've read so many fantasy novels over my lifetime. Sure. You know, it's inevitable. But it's something I love, things that open with a bang. The Lethal Weapon 2s of this world that open up with boom, car chase, you're just in it. You know, we don't, first one we slow burned it. Second one, bam, you're in the middle of something. Yeah, well, there's no inciting incident yet.
I want you to know that my graphic novel does start with the word cacophony. And so, and
it's one of those. But
it's 6 pages says cacophony across.
Well, it's unfortunate. Like I picked those words because like, and the thing is like, this is not the first time I've gotten pushback by creative types. So like, whoa, slow your roll, motherfucker! Every single time.
No, that wasn't.
I used the word cacophonous on my second.
And I've used it too.
But Gibby, I was joking with you. I think Gibby, you're making a great point, because what you're talking about is people who are punching in like crazy words like cacophony and din as if that makes great writing because they used these like ethereal words.
That's you spelled it out. So
So one thing that I think is really funny about that, in Absolute, and I had to go through this with Jason a couple of times. Every time the Envy speak, I needed a thesaurus, because he would throw in words, and I was like, I don't know if that word is not only spelled right, but if it's used correctly. And I'm sitting there like, hold on a second. And I go and Google it, and I was like, that is technically
or she'd be like,
correct.
Sai, I'm not giving you the context. What's this word?
But can you tell me, does this sentence make sense? Yeah. Like, is this sentence used correctly? And then I go back to Jason, and I was like, you write them so... Like, I literally have had to look up multiple words that they use. And he goes, well, if you know about that group of people in his comic, they are supposed to be... Like, they basically get high off of their own farts. Like, they think they're the most amazing thing in the world. The apex of pretentiousness,
Yes.
Exactly. And so they use the most pretentious
I've been to San Francisco, I know.
Possible, exactly. But what ended up happening is you got this really cool dichotomy between, you'd have them and then you'd have any of the other characters, and they'd be like, you know, his made up language of swearing and stuff, where they'd be like, yeah, I get fracked or whatever. And you're like, well, that is hilarious, because they'd be like, how dare you speak in such a way to me? And like, they'd all just, the more that you got that kind of dichotomy going back and forth, you were like, oh, you guys are just pretentious assholes. That's what this. So like, I'd start reading their words, and like the editor in me would have to go back and be like, no, you actually do have to make sure that this is used correctly. And so I would like, okay, yeah. And then I'd go back and read it for fun. And I was like, man, it just really makes you hate them, because you know that the only reason they're using these words is because they feel that they are better than everyone else. And that's using it in a good way to build character. But if everybody sounds like that,
right,
then what's the point? Like, now you think as a writer, you think that makes you sound like an intellectual writer.
Well, it's like everybody that started to ape the Matrix, and everybody wanted to be the architect in their style. And that's
or like Agent Smith.
Right.
Really quickly,
so,
back to what Eric had just said. If you, this is what I loved about Aaron Sorkin when I was younger, is how he wrote his characters, and what I started to hate about Aaron Sorkin as I grew older and kind of realized that I saw behind the curtain. The American President, if you ever want to see that in a longer format, between what's his name, Sheen and Michael Douglas.
Annette Bening.
Michael Douglas.
Oh.
Annette Bening, yeah.
But what I was going to ask, since we have so many artistically inclined writers on the panel, was touching on something Crager said, and everyone kind of added on to. You guys kind of get the concept of the character, and then kind of figure out the look later. Do you ever work in the opposite way? Do you ever get just this image in your mind, or maybe down on paper, and you have to write this as a character. You have to flesh it out entirely, because just the concept, the visual of the character is so compelling to you.
Well, of course. I mean, it's not one or the other. I think it's, at least I won't speak for anybody else. I'll speak for myself. But sometimes I'll start with just the picture. Literally, the picture I drew. I'm like, I need to know its backstory immediately. And sometimes I'll work the other direction. Like, who would fit better in this world? I've done it from both sides. So.
Maybe goes both ways.
I think the person who taught me how to design characters was Michael Baer. So he's an artist from the 80s and 90s that did like Hellstorm. He inked the first She book. He worked on Justice League of America. The guy did everything forever. So Michael Baer, friends with Mark Texiera, and he sat me down one day because he saw me drawing, and I was probably 17 years old. And he goes, "Tell me about your character." So I started telling him about this character, but all the words I was using were just like description words, like, you know, she's angry, she's this, she's that. And he was like, no. He goes, you're not telling me about the character. What does she like to eat? What does she do? Like, tell me about the character.
Hobbies?
Like, what are her hobbies? And that really changed it for me. Like, I then started thinking about characters as full people. And then one of the things I noticed, like, it's the right project for the right person also. Like, hey, quiet, Twiggy. Quiet.
Twiggy don't give a fuck.
Yeah, little chihuahua, don't care. So, like, Kill Journal. It's a book about post-traumatically stressed people.
Oh, yeah.
Essentially. Well, hell, you might as well hire a post-traumatically stressed artist to do it. Right?
Just for authenticity's sake, if nothing else.
Just for authenticity's sake. Now, Adam, you know, when he first hired me on, he didn't know, like, any backstory of my life. He just went, you know, right artist for the right project. And when he hired me on,
didn't know how right that was.
Yeah, the first thing I started telling him was like, dude, this is right up my alley. And he, you know, and then I had to explain to him, like, I came from violence, so I get it. I get the idea of what you're doing and how vengeance is such a huge thing, because that is exactly what happens if people get murdered in your life and things like that. You're gonna want vengeance. Yeah. That idea that everybody is like, oh, I forgive you. Fuck you. Okay, I don't care about that stuff. I want justice. So I think he hired the right person for the job, because I understood what it took to traumatize the readers, plus the characters themselves are already traumatized. And if I draw everything over the top, bloody, violent, and just absolutely as far as you can take it, it's a juxtapose to the, I guess, the post-traumatic stress of these characters. And and it worked. It worked in that aspect. Just kind of how, like, Jawbone Death. Jawbone Death is so different than Kill Journal in the aspect that it's happening, like it's real, but it's also cartoony at once. And as real as it is, and as serious as it is, it also has this cartoon violence to just juxtapose the actual seriousness of it. Whereas that would have never worked with Kill Journal.
Right. Kill Journal was a lot more serious and somber and had that more dark tone.
Exactly.
Like there's not a whole lot of any kind of slapsticky humor instantly is gonna just fall flat in that setting because of everything that those characters have been put into.
Where Jawbone Death fits in, like, the Lobo end of the world, like Grant Morrison.
So if you're doing something that's more Lobo-esque, then you can have slapstick and it'll work well.
Exactly. And it's the right person for the right job. And
Absolutely.
I think just like the guy who did Axe Wielder John, right? Like, that story was based around something that happened to his daughter, right? And this character fixes everything with violence. So he decided to run it as far as he could, like 160 pages of violence to resolve this thing. That in itself was done out of necessity, and only he could have done it in that way, because he understands that suffering. So yeah, I mean, everybody for the right job. Right person for the right job. Some are better than others because they've been through it. And yeah, I think... Yeah. Tell us about you, buddy.
There's a murder happening in the background.
Right now. You gotta go save your child.
I lost track of the question. What was it? What was the question? There's something about American President for sure. Oh, starting from a visual first, having to be that so compelling that it's the thing that I have to find a way to squeeze it in. No, I don't. Not, at least not lately. Everything that I have been doing in recent time is facilitated by story and character first. And if I can help stand up what those stories and characters are about visually, then that's a nice little bonus. I don't know. I think it's because it's just a shift in focus for me, where I used to be so visually centric. Look how cool that character design is, and naturally it comes with little narratives that I tell myself, oh, that's designed by X, Y, and Z. But I think for me to really feel comfortable about moving forward with any sort of story, I need to have a decent bearing on where I'm going narratively, primarily, again, within a 3-act structure. And then I build the characters within that to help stand up that story, right? Because I end up focusing on theme and go like, okay, I'm going to build this character to either help highlight and be the standard bearer of that theme, or the sets of characters that will help contradict it, but also maintaining a version of that theme that's not exactly how I presented it in the first place. So yeah, after that though, then I go like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if this thing was done in a giant, refrigerator cryo chamber building, blah, blah, blah. But it rarely these days goes the other way.
Okay. Adam, what about you? Since you don't necessarily do the art, but you still have that kind of artistic mindset.
Yeah, I think there's kind of three ways I get it. One is I see a visual, right, in my head, but sometimes I hear the voice. I think this happens often, like when I'm writing something, people talk about like they're visualizing maybe a fight, like Gibby does. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way to this. That lots of times I'm hearing the page. I'm not seeing the page in the visual sense. I'm hearing the words that make up the story in that page. And so sometimes I think a character will begin in dialogue, in a sound, in a voice for me. And so I think it kind of goes between those two when it comes to character creation. And then when it comes to story, it goes two ways. One, it starts with the character and goes into the story, or I might have some hook that then bleeds back the other direction. Yep. Those stories, you know, it depends. When I'm writing a film, I approach it that way. I wrote this movie called The Time to Hate, and I wrote this other movie called Game Therapy for Universal, and I built it from the hook backwards. So I think it's kind of like three ways. If it's a film, I'm going to go hook backwards. If it's a comic book or a television script, it might happen the other two ways.
I've done novels that are from hook backwards and from the other way, from the character forwards, and I'm happy with both.
Yeah,
I think it's really just wherever you find the inspiration. Because
sure.
I kind of feel the same way. It depends on what suits. Sometimes I'll have a really good image. Sometimes I'll have a really good idea, and it's just characters can come from good ideas, and good ideas can come from characters. All right, so real quick, we just want to thank everyone. This is always such a great discussion. I always feel like this time goes by so
very
damn quick.
quickly. Yes,
very
especially
quickly,
since we used to do this for like 2 or 3 hours.
Oh yeah, we used to just talk incessantly. And so real quick, Gib has his little outro questions, and we just want to thank everyone for watching, and please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. And Gib, why don't you give our guests a scenario, and we'll start with
all right,
Crager, and then Adam, and then we'll...
All right, so I can each give you a different one, or you can have the same one you answer respectively. I can make it short because you haven't been everybody short on time. What would you like?
Do the short same.
Okay, so we'll start with Adam. All right.
Yep.
Adam, you're standing on the street. A man walks up to you. He puts a note in your hand. The note reads, "We are hunting you. This is not a joke. In 10 minutes, we're going to try and kill you. Run now." You have one weapon of your choice, 3 books, and 1 luxury item. What do you do?
Well, hopefully the luxury item is a Tesla, and so I dive into that, and I drive home to my wife and child, where I grab my very small revolver and hold up in my closet and prepare for the onslaught.
And what books are you bringing in there while you wait?
I'm gonna bring Absolute and Arcana.
Yes.
I bring a book on how to survive on less than 100 calories a day, so I can hole up for a long time.
What about your family? Just keep them on something.
Well, they're not being hunted, so they're safe.
They're okay. It's just Adam apparently being hunted. All right, Jason, same question. What do you do?
Oh, somebody handed me something like that in the street, I would probably take them hostage.
Great answer.
Nice
yeah, I wouldn't let them go anywhere. They would be my hostage, and if I had a luxury item, it would probably be a baton, because I would want them to be beaten to the point of, telling me whatever I needed to know, plus if I needed to violate them with something.
This took a turn.
I think that's the most.
I told you I came
answer
from violence, so it isn't going to be like a far step for me to just propagate that.
The old baton in the asshole gambit.
Yeah,
I see how
and he'll pretty
right.
much tell me whatever I want to know at that point. So
I agree with.
Or they call you later for dinner.
So and then I guess my luxury item was the baton. The books that I had, how to cook humans.
This sounds like the original plot to Citizen Kane. I gotta be honest with you.
Like, I mean, I don't know what else I could possibly
Normally
need.
I
The
give
other
people
two,
different questions so they don't have time to like.
could the other
to
two
think about
books
it.
be sketchbooks so I could just
Sure.
draw what I see? Okay, fine.
Wow.
And then, yeah, I'll just hold up with him hostage until they get there, and then I'll make them all my bitches.
There we go.
So yeah, I'm not worried.
Wow.
I'm not worried. So I'm the wrong person to fucking say that
No,
to.
that's great. That's wonderful. Thank you guys so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love having these kind of conversations with such amazing guests and with our awesome panel. So thank you so much. And everyone who's watching, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Red Valkyrie. Make sure you ring that bell, maybe become a member, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
If you like this episode of Writing Prose, be sure to check out some of our previous ones. We've had a lot of great guests and some amazing discussions. Also, redvalkyrie.net has some of the best merch, cosplay, and upcoming activities that you could want. See you guys next time.